This will be the act of ideation. I'm trying to explain to you, or just show you what the act of ideation is. I want you to imagine, whoever you are watching this video now, I want you to imagine a square, just a regular square, nothing fancy, right? Okay. I want you to imagine inside of that square a circle. Now the circle can touch the perimeter of the square, the circle could be in the center of the square, it doesn't really matter. The only thing that I want you to communicate, the only image, the only idea that I'm trying to communicate to you without drawing it, without showing you what it looks like, is a square with a circle inside, right? Have the idea of a square with a circle inside. You got it? Okay. So your idea should look something like this, right? Right? Something like that. Your circle might be a little bit smaller, your circle might be a little bit bigger, but if you understood what I was saying, then you had the idea of this in your mind, and you could draw it on a sheet of paper to prove that you have an understanding of the idea, right? A square with a circle inside. That, what I just did, was me beginning the process of ideation. It's an extremely simple idea that I just communicated, but what I was able to demonstrate, hopefully, is that I was able to, what's called posit, P-O-S-I-T, I was able to basically deposit this idea from my mind to your mind without actually illustrating it, right? Just by communicating this idea, you had the idea of circle inside of a square. Now, imagine that I were a hate mongerer or a warmonger, right? And I was communicating ideas of hatred. Or imagine that I was a genocidal orchestrator, and I'm communicating ideas of hate, right? Of destruction, of war. Just like I was able to communicate this idea and get you to understand the idea of circle inside a square, so too, you have to be very skilled at this, right? So too can very skilled orators communicate very, very complicated ideas and get basically the general population, the masses, to conform to those ideations, right? In genocide, it's important that we not only understand sort of the semantic definitional accounts of genocide, it's not only important that we understand sort of the relationship between action and ideas, actions and intent. It's not only important that we have an understanding of the historical situatedness of genocide within the context of history. It's absolutely important, and very few people are doing it, but this is my contribution as a philosopher, is that we have a conceptual understanding of genocide. How do we come to understand genocide conceptually? How can we apply the concepts inherent within a discussion in genocide to sort of logical reasoning? How can we prove, demonstrate, and so on? This idea of ideation and the very simple example that I just gave you of a circle inside of a square is proof, in a sense, that the power of ideation is possible. All we do is we build on that foundation, the foundation of ideation, to create far more complicated ideas to be transmitted to individuals in the population. Okay, so you have an idea of ideation. All right, number two. Number two is an ideology. An ideology. So one is ideation, two is ideology. An ideology, and this is basically, again, just a definition that I threw together. Ideology is a regulatory system of ideas used to assess human conduct. A regulatory system of ideas used to assess human conduct. So ideology is a regulatory system of ideas used to assess human conduct. Okay, so an ideology is a regulatory, right? By regulatory we means regulating, right? It governs, it orchestrates, it fashions a system of ideas, right? This is important, right? It's not just one seminal idea, right? It's a system of ideas. So, for example, your car, in a very simple sense, functions on a system, right? You have the gas, you have the ignition, you have the spark plug, You have, if you have a fuel-injected car, then the fuel injection, the transmission, and so on. It's this huge system that orchestrates, that's orchestrated to sort of conduct the process of driving, the process of moving from point A to point B. Right? There's a system involved to facilitate this idea of transportation. Similarly, if we're talking about an ideology, well, what an ideology is, it's nothing more than a system of ideas, the system that has been attributed to sort of desperate groups of ideas, so that we can talk about these ideas as a system, right? The ideology of fascism, the ideology of Marxism, the ideology of social Darwinism, or whatever it might be, right? So the system of ideas is used to assess, right, to sort of make distinctions in conduct, right, in human conduct. So let me give you a visual, because that might have been a bit shaky. Visuals are always better. Imagine that we have an ideology, right? And the ideology says that when people do X, their action is good. When people do Y, their action is bad, right? So basically the ideology says, when people do X, their action is good. When people do Y, their action is bad. This is very, very simple, right? The reason why I want to do this is just so you have an understanding of the system of ideas, right? So obviously we have two different, this is a very simple ideology. It only has two parts, part X and part Y. And what it says is, okay, I'm going to create a system describing these ideas. The idea is that if you do X, then your action is good. If you do Y, then your action is bad. So this individual does X. This individual does Y. What we want to do now is we want to make an assessment of human conduct. How do we define this person's conduct? How do we define this person's conduct, right? Well, the way that you define a person's conduct with respect to ideology is that you look at the action and you reference the action to what the ideology says, right? If the ideology says that X is good, well, you know the individual who did action X, you can make the assessment that this individual is good, or the act that the individual did was good. If the ideology says that Y is bad, then the individual who does action Y has committed a wrongdoing, right? Has done something that's bad, right? So what I've done is I've taken multiple ideas, I've systematized these ideas, right? Idea X, idea Y, and I mean this can go on, for pages, right? But very simply, idea X, idea Y, I've taken those ideas, I've created a system. I've said in this ideology that anytime action X is done, the action is good. Anytime action Y is done, the action is bad. That sort of governs, right? The ideology is going to govern human conduct. Right? And that's very important, right? The ideology is going to govern human conduct. If I want to know whether or not an action is right or wrong, if I want to know that if somebody is to be praised or punished, the only way I'm able to do it is by referring to the ideology. Well, what did the ideology say, right? Norms function in a very similar, a little different, but norms function in a very similar sense, right? So with respect to ideology then, what we see is for us to make an assessment on whether somebody should be praised or punished, what we do is we make reference to the ideology, see what the ideology stipulates. If the ideology stipulates that their action is good, well, obviously they'll be praised. If the ideology stipulates that their action is bad, or that they themselves are bad, then either they will be punished or their actions will be punished, so on. You get the idea. So what we've done is we've seen that ideologies are basically constructed for a very specific reason, right? Human beings create ideologies to explain and govern the conduct of other human beings, right? You can create an ideology to explain behavior. Genocide isn't an ideology and doesn't govern under sort of the explanatory explanatory purview of ideology. Genocide, and we'll see in a second, genocide basically exists as a different form of ideology, one that I'll put up next.